Hello everyone, it's your old pal Living Dead. Welcome back to Mapping Diaries Episode 2, Aspect of Daedalus, or How to Ruin Your Own Plans. Yes, we are going to be looking at the third map that I ever published, Aspect of Daedalus. I began working on it after I began working on Elevator Response, but before I finished and published that one. And it's funny, the lessons I learned from this one that I carried over to that one. Primarily among those is the fact that you have to be cognizant of how things that you try to design will compete against each other. And this map serves a very good example of setting up fights that end up contradicting themselves in terms of what you want to happen and what does end up happening. Let's go ahead and open the map up and we'll begin exploring. This is Aspect of Daedalus. This map features 317 monsters and 7 secrets. Takes about 30 to 45 minutes. As you can see from the beginning, we face the player. We start off facing the player in the direction of the shotgun at the beginning, and we flush the player out into this wide open area. Now, what will happen if the player runs around is they will start waking up all the monsters. So hopefully they run in here and grab the shotgun. As I discovered in watching people play the map and record videos of it, that often did not happen. People would immediately run out into the open area and start running around in circles looking for the weapon. They would not see this even though the player starts the map facing the shotgun. It is literally in the center of the screen at the very beginning of the map. I think the lesson you can take away from this is that there is absolutely no guarantee that the player will ever see something that they need to see. You can never make it a 100% certainty. Somebody will miss it every single time. So, this trap springs when you pick up the shotgun, and it's just meant to trap the player in here for just a moment and get them warmed up. Just a little bit of something to just kind of get them going. You have to hit 2 switches to get out, just so that the player doesn't panic and try to hit the first switch that they see. As players often do that when they are locked in a trap, they will immediately look for what can let them out of the trap. So we just give a little bit of redundancy and ensure the player most of the time will stay in the trap by putting 2 switches. Once the trap has been cleared and all the monsters are free, hitting those 2 switches as you saw opens the 2 revenants up to flush the player back out into the map. I think most people will agree that even if you pick up the box of shells and have the shotgun, you don't have enough resources to fight the revenants. So the objective is to get the player to come out in here and start looking for resources. Hence why I put a lot of effort into this open area. As you can see, there are quite a few traps. There's hit scanners. There's various other turret enemies perched up, just to give the player several different possible things to target. There's a caco that flies around that can harass the player. And probably my best usage of a Baron ever, this Baron right here. And really what he does is he just makes sure that the player can never stay in one spot permanently. It's not intended that the player will try to fight him. Most players will agree again that 16 shells is not nearly enough to fight something like a Baron at the beginning of a map. So hopefully they start running around looking for what to do. Now I'm going to take a pause here, and we're going to examine this arena for just a moment, this entire starting area, and I'll give you a few of my thoughts about how it plays out. So what I'm going to do here is stand put, and we will disappear off into the other world for just a moment. This is what the map looks like in Ultimate Doom Builder. As you can see, it's very large. There's quite a few things going on with it. Many different traps and closets off to the side, voodoo dolls, conveyor belts, all that fun business. Some down here as well, and over here. This is where the starting area is located. This is what the map looks like in 3D mode. As you can see, there is a pretty dispersed placement of enemies. Lots of peons for the shotgun to take care of. Some turrets up here that are unrealistic to deal with the shotgun at the beginning. A few perched hit scanners just to give some different target prioritization options, and to also draw the player's attention towards the rocket launcher. As you can see, it's a pretty circular type of arena here. The player has a few different options when they're at the beginning. If we're lucky, what the player first sees when they spawn into the map is the shotgun, but best laid plans on all that. If the player sets that as their first objective, then of course they're going to just go north to this room and spring this trap here. The player can also go to the west and circle around this way to pick up some early health if they need it, or to notate where a health location is, pick up some rockets, and see that the rocket launcher is here, and mostly to find the green armor. Picking up this green armor actually opens this entire cage up and springs a trap of chain gunners here. So it's a little bit mean-spirited to give the player the best defense to get hit scan and then make the players fight the hardest hit scanners. But you know, sometimes I just like to be mean that way. The player can also go to the east. And here they will find probably, as I mentioned, the best placement of a Baron that I ever put in a map. It's a Hell Knight on lesser difficulties, but I'm not looking at those right now. There's some health. Of course, those are different between different difficulties as well. And the player has one of two ways to get out of this little canal area if they come down here to get this health pack or any other supplies. The progression is off to this way here. And that's the main purpose of this path, is to give the player the most direct way to get to the progression. And there's a few different ways that the player might kind of puzzle out that the progression is this. First and foremost, if they come this way, they will see that this is a bit of a dead end. But the player might see this, they might see these, they might think, well, maybe I need to go towards the right side of the map then. The player can come up here to get different ammo and fight these enemies here. Finally, the player can progress through this beginning part of the map. We'll call this chapter 1 of the map. Finding this switch in this room and switching it. It will open up these doors down here that I alluded to a moment ago and allow the player to progress into, let's say, chapter 2 of the map, where they will get more powerful weapons and find the blue key. Now, a few things about this arena that make it flow the way that it does. What it does do very well is it causes a very frantic pacing from the player. The player is going to be scrambling and looking for supplies. The reason that works out so well is that we have these Revenant turrets here that really just place a lot of the main pressure on the player. Everything else, in my opinion, is a bit ancillary. These hit scanners, the demons to chase you around, the Baron. The Baron is good at preventing the player from sticking to one space for too long. He will eventually come down and get you, and especially if you have the shotgun, you're probably not going to want to commit the shells to killing him. The second part of that is that the Revenants will basically keep you from sticking your head out in the open too much. So the player might want to chase down different enemies and hunt them. They might go into this arena to look for resources, which is another major component of its design. Really, what I don't want the player to do is get the shotgun and turtle up in this room. So I place the Revenant traps in here to flush the player out after they defeat the imps and the pinkies, but also I don't want them to have enough resources to stay up in here even if they manage to clear it out. So there's resources kind of sprawled throughout here. There's a shell box here, and I believe that's probably mostly it besides these odds and ends of random shells placed here and there. And the purpose for that is that eventually the player realizes they need to leave this area. It's easy for a player to be given a very wide type of place to be in, an expansive type of area, and not really understand what the intent is. But I'm hoping that by depriving the player of resources here, we kind of flush them into exploring where they will see that this is more or less the only way forward. Now, one of the reasons that this particular signposting was so ineffectual, what ends up happening is that the player's under duress. They hit this button. They need to notice that these doors open. But what ends up happening is that these walls are windows, and so they don't protect the player from the Revenant. So while my original intent was to keep the player from turtling up in this room, I really could have relied maybe more on the Baron or the Cacodemons to prevent that on the longer term, and at least given the player a break from the Revenant rockets so that when they hit this switch, they have just enough time to catch their breath and have a better sense of what it does by opening these doors here. As it stands, what a lot of players would do is hit this button and panic and then start running around the arena, not realizing what it was, and it would take them a minute or two more before they understand they need to come back down here to progress onto the next part of the map. Okay, and now we're back. So, here we are at the first secret, the Berserk Pack. This switch here, and you can see it's not, something about the way that I set the sector up means that it's not always triggered. It is what it is. I guess there's possible to skip that sector by accident. This switch here is actually used if the player discovers the secret later on in the map. You'll understand why in a little bit. So the objective for the player is to get over to this blue area. A lot of people miss this, of course, but it's okay to get the player lost for just a little bit. That's kind of part of this fun. The whole point of this open area was to allow the player to have a bit of an open place to explore, have some monsters that just kind of roam around and can be dealt with in various different ways to allow the player to get a little bit lost and see different areas of the map and wonder, is this a dead end? Is this something I'll be getting to later? And I think in that front, it is a successful map. This map for me is a creative endeavor, had several different goals associated with it. And I think first and foremost was just having a big open area to begin the map in. My first map that I've made the episode 1 of the Mapping Diary is about, it's a non-linear map, but it does have a few obvious paths to take, and it just gives the player some options. It's a standard tech-based type of thing. This one I wanted to go for something that was a little bit more abstract. So that was one of my goals, is to just look at something and make it where I don't know that I necessarily have to think about the purpose of every single room. That's a trap that I tend to fall into when I make maps of any kind, is I over-realistic eyes them, I guess, and I make them, I think about too much about what the areas are supposed to be. So for this map, I wanted it to be, I wanted to have themes of different areas, but I wanted it to be abstract enough that it didn't really matter what certain things were. The other goal of this map was to have, more thoughtful combat. So it's just the way that enemies were used, hopefully just is a little bit more measured on my front. I'd say that has questionable results. We'll see that later. And minimize the usage of doors. I think doors can kind of make combat a little bit clunky. So when you have an opportunity to get rid of a door, a lot of times it's beneficial to do that. Now you see here that these revenants can sit here and just continue to shellac the player. And the reason I put these windows here is because I really didn't want the player to sit in this room and put their back to the wall. That's a concept that I really like to indulge, is the idea of where are you going to make your first fortification in a map? Where are you going to put your back to the wall? And I didn't want the player to really do that at any point in the beginning of the map because I wanted everything to feel dangerous. I wanted the whole beginning of the map to feel hectic. But that has a drawback. This switch is necessary to progress. And if you are not under duress, you will probably not take too long to miss that it opens this door here. But what ends up happening is that players who are panicking and running away from the Revenants and anything else that might chase them up there, like the Baron, are going to hit that switch and then immediately just get out of there. And that has the unintended effect of causing the player to miss it a good part of the time. So there's a lesson to be learned there in how the pressure that you can create can absolutely impact what it is that the player will actually see. And a lot of times it will kind of compromise certain things that need to happen and make it a little bit more awkward than it needs to be. So in this area, this is the first area where we get the super shotgun. And, the map goes on just about as long as you'd want with the amount of firepower that the player has. At some point, I want the player to change the tide from running away from enemies to fighting back against enemies. And in my experience, a lot of times in Doom, that is very common when the player finds either the super shotgun or the rocket launcher for the first time. It changes the stakes. The super shotgun is a weapon that can deal with very low tier enemies instantaneously, can clear out huge groups. It can deal with heavy hitters and bruisers in very quick capacity. So if you give it to the player too early, unless you want to just limit the amount of shells the player has, there's a little bit of that aspect of they are too powerful. But if you wait too long to give it to them, then the map can start to feel grindy, especially if you employ heavy usage of Doom 2 specific enemies. So the intent with this here is the player jumps down into this room. They see that there's a variety of enemies. This is a nice open area for the player to maneuver. I didn't really want space to be too much of a restriction here. I did want to make it difficult to get out. The Baron is probably waiting for the player back up here unless they actually did deal with him. Maybe they killed him with infighting or something like that. The elevator takes a long time, so the player also needs to go in here to progress. Hopefully the player sees that the super shotgun is up here. It's easy to miss, but that is why I tried my best to kind of highlight it with both the blue lights and the orange. Orange is something that this map doesn't really feature much of at all, and so it is a color that stands out. And just in nature and in life in general, you're more likely to notice something like this. But I did find that not everybody saw it immediately. So The intent behind it is to just give the player an immediate mini objective. Ooh, there's the super shotgun. Now it's time to gear up. This is what I've been waiting for. And how do I get to that super shotgun? So we're doing a little bit of a mental exercise. Got to try to figure out how to navigate the area to get up to the super shotgun. Then they can finally grab it and start fighting these revenants and this Hell Knight. If the player comes through here, they can get their chain gun for the first time. If they don't come through here, they'll get the chain gun a little bit later. Over here is a secret that you saw me pick up a moment ago. It contains the backpack. Since this is a secret sector, you actually don't get damaged if you're under here. I try to telegraph the secrets to some degree, so the giveaway is that the texture is different than everything else. But most people didn't actually end up noticing it, so it's a secret that was missed a lot in the videos that I saw. I tried really hard to detail this area using mostly stock textures, but with a little bit more of a, a modern flair for detail. So lots of detailing sectors, frequent usage of different textures to kind of alternate, highlighting the floor shape with, a solid color texture. I really like that technique. And if you'll notice, there's a little bit of O-text tucked away in here. So yes, I do use O-text in this map. And it's just to kind of use it for highlighting purposes more than anything else. I just like a little bit of variety. So to progress the map, we go in here. This is not poisonous, and hopefully the player realizes that the mud versus the poison is the difference here. Now, because this is probably the first dangerous trap, I'm going to save the game. This is just what I wanted to create a little bit of an homage to some classic Ultimate Doom type of stuff. So the flashing areas. If you have dynamic lights on, you can kind of see that there's something over here. It's a lost soul. These monsters are set to ambush and to just punish anybody who charges headfirst in here. However, there is one more punishment to be found. The Archvile will show up. It's not actually that hard to deal with, but in this narrow area, if you kind of mess up and you don't strafe exactly on the lateral to get back into one of these areas, your next chance is to back up. It's not hard for players to get zapped by this Archvile, so he's not supposed to be super duper tricky, but just dangerous enough to kind of keep you on your toes. Oh, I fell for my own trap here. So as you can see, I woke up both a Spectre and a Revenant. And it's not a very high density of enemies in here, but this area can be kind of dangerous if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. Little known thing that nobody noticed. This is actually a quote-unquote dummy sector that I used. Not really a dummy sector, it's just a bordering sector so that I could allow the lights to glow up and down like this, adjacent to this bright sector here. That's what that is. There's a better way to do that, but that's how I did it for this one. Just a tiny little sector here. So, again, this area is not too hard, but just fighting a couple of Revenants with some Spectres thrown into the mix. Especially a Spectre that wants to take fucking 5 shots with the super shotgun to kill. When does that ever happen? It's, it's a little bit difficult to deal with, unless you want to backtrack and cheese and just funnel all the enemies out here. I guess you could do that. Most people didn't. Another thing that I did was the chain gunners, again, to give the player the chain gun for the first time. And also, chain gunners are very punishing enemies if you ignore them, if you don't see them there. And lastly, the Lost Souls, just to minimize the amount of enemies that the Archvile is capable of resurrecting. I wanted something that's dangerous, but I didn't really want something to make this grindy. So here's another trap. 2 line defs force the player out into this area with the Hell Knights showing up. Most people fell for this trap. And by running away from the Hell Knights, they spring this very large trap in this very precarious arena. As you can see, the Mancubus turns this into a pretty dangerous affair. So how do you defeat this trap? Well, one thing you can do is just not panic and fight these Hell Knights one at a time. The other thing is just to do a little bit better when you do spring the trap. It's not undoable. It's just a little bit tricky. So we open the wall by springing the line def. There's a few hit scanners in here just to kind of slow you down and make you have to churn your way through something. And then, of course, the Mancubus, just to prevent the player more or less from running into this area and putting their back against the wall. Again, I don't want the player to stumble upon a place to put their back against the wall. I want the player to make a place to put their back against the wall. That is why these bars are locked. You have to go in here to open the bars. Actually, I think the bars open when you hit this switch here. There's another secret over here. You'll notice that this texture right here is different. You hit this here. That's how you get the rocket launcher early. It's easy to miss, especially with the sound of the ambient lifts in this little piston type of pump room, up and down. But if the player is listening through headphones, they might actually hear this here. So, this is another one of my big set pieces here. First of all, the player should realize pretty easily that they're going to need the rad suit to progress on. There is poison all the way through this entire arena. So the player is going to grab the rad suit. We'll go ahead and save the game here. They come out into this room. There is a pain elemental. Now, most people see a pain elemental, and if you know what you're trying to do, you will either chase down the pain elemental to prevent him from spawning lost souls, or you will, just try to hide from him so he doesn't, so you break line of sight against him. So for the players that charge headfirst in, there's a line def in either of these alcoves, and springing either one of them will spawn all the enemies, open the doors, revealing the Revenant and the Chain Gunners, and turn this into the first little arena fight. The Arachnotrons make decent enemies here. They're really dangerous, but they're not impossible to deal with, especially if you get the rocket launcher early, but even if you don't, there's more than enough ammo to deal with all the enemies here. Although by the time you get to the end, you may be a little bit more strapped than players who do find the rocket launcher. This is one of those progressions that is not really hidden, or I guess you could say it's hidden in plain sight. So I do want to prevent the player from just going to the next area and then funneling enemies through the room. So I close this door here and I hit that switch. It's just a couple of things that the player has to mentally click together just to realize what they need to do, and it just prevents people from running around too early. So the lift here doesn't go back down, but the player can get back if they really wanted to by jumping down through here. So it's not perfectly one way. And just real quick, I'm even going to fly just to show this off. One thing you can see, and that I wanted to make sure that I did intentionally, is to just show the player the next area. So how do I get there? Well, the door is broken. It's partially closed. There's a window here that shows me something I haven't seen yet. Hopefully the player realizes they make a mental connection of what map they need, or what path they need to take to get to where they need to go. It's very important to me sometimes to make sure that the player can kind of just put those little pieces together so they can feel smart. So here is the first, I'd say, really big set piece of the map. So when the player jumps down, they trip the line def that spawns all these revenants here. I'm going to pause for a second to show you the layout of this fight before we jump into it. So if you'll just give me a moment here. This big set piece takes place in this area of the map to the east from the starting area. In fact, it's almost directly east from where the player starts. The main thrust of this fight is that these revenants, there are 6 of them, are hidden down in these little traps below the floor. Of course, they are untextured so that they do not appear. You cannot tell that there are holes there. And when the player trips the line def, any line def that leaves this plane here, the revenants will immediately pop out of the floor. This line def that I'm referring to is one of these. It's one of these here. It's this one here. This line def here will raise the revenants instantaneously. Now, important for me was making sure that the trap was sprung basically as soon as the players jumped down. Not before, of course, because we don't want to give the player any opportunity to turtle up here. That would actually make a decent place until they start running out of ammo. And by doing it as soon as the player hits the ground, they are given a quick choice. Do they run up and try to risk it and grab this armor, take some damage. Most people probably will not. The fact that there are 6 Revenants on the stairs, with most players having only been equipped with the super shotgun and the chain gun up to this point, most of them will not find the rocket launcher secret, means that they are given a choice, but it's a rather obvious one. Let's go ahead and run up these stairs here, which triggers the second part of the trap and the big part of the arena fight. By crossing this line def here, or alternatively, this line def here, this line def here, the player opens up this sector, these sectors, and they activate all the teleporting traps that bring the peon monsters into this room, as well as opening this door, these doors here that let pinkies into the fight. So if we look at this arena from our magical god position, the player jumps down from that platform here, the Revenants begin to pop up over here, the player is funneled up these stairs where they trigger either this line def here, or if they do happen to run past Revenants, up the stairs here and trigger the line def here. This opens, this opens, this opens, this opens, these open, and monsters absolutely flood into this arena. It becomes chaos instantaneously. Now let me give you 1 second to think about what possible problem that would be. A final key piece of information that may help you decide that is that this door is in no way restricted from being opened at all. The player can immediately go to this door, open it, and at beyond, get the blue key card. Here's what it is. You don't have to trigger this trap at all. The only part of the trap that you actually have to trigger is by jumping down and crossing this line def and making the Revenants pop up. But let's be honest. Most people who play Doom can deal with 6 Revenants if they have a super shotgun and a decent amount of ammo. Especially given the fact that we have a nice little place here, we can go outside. So if a player is actually smart enough, they can bypass this entire trap and go straight to the blue key and not have to worry about any of this. One thing that would have been smart to do is if I didn't design it the same way, although I probably would make it so that one of the stair line defs here, and in fact, it's not too late to change it. This is an original mistake that I made. I guess I could just go back and change it. Is crossing this line def triggers the trap as well, so there's no way to avoid it. Alternatively, we place the plasma gun from there into here. There's not really any reason to prevent the player from getting the plasma gun here. It is, after all, sort of the main component of the fight. But by placing the plasma gun over here, I hoped to encourage the player to do more than just stay in this room or in this area here. The player can't really get away with that anyways, as you will see when we resume the fight. But I think I still would have placed the plasma gun here in the middle to make sure that this is wholly engaged with as I had planned it. On top of the hit scanners, we do have a few imps. I believe there was a Hell Knight up here in one earlier version, but he was just too grindy to kill. Imps are hard enough to deal with anyways when there are 8 of them on top of, I think somewhere in the ballpark of 30 or 40 hit scanners. Some former humans entirely will come in. Previous versions of the fight, I think there were shotgun sergeants at some point. 6 Revenants and a handful of pinkies here. This place gets crowded really fast and it gets dangerous very quickly. So let's see how that fight plays out in real time. And we will resume. So with all that being said, I made quite a few mistakes with how this fight can play out. It is entirely possible to skip it. And again, if I had the choice, I would, which I do, I mean, I could technically go back and edit this anytime I want to. I would put the plasma gun so that it is inside that room, and most players are not going to skip it in that point. Now, one thing I do find really fun is just low-grade tier enemies spam that the player can just chew through with the chain gun or the plasma gun or even the rocket launcher if they have it. I think originally I experimented with a mix of different hit scanners. I think I probably had some sergeants in here and some chain gunners, but it's just it's honestly really hard. And I think even with just the former humans, it's hard enough that, wow, I can't believe that rocket didn't kill me. But that one did. I've seen people defeat this fight pretty handily. I don't think it's that hard, but I am also playing and talking at the same time, so if you'll give me a bit of a pass on this one. But I did just kind of want to give the player a nice big open arena There is an element of running around in circles to it, but it's not really easy to do. You are punished. There are places to kind of get yourself trapped, as you can see. And so there's a lot of thought about where to go and what to do. I don't think it would have been unreasonable to just give the player the plasma gun in retrospect. I think the plasma gun is pretty necessary for this fight. Might as well make it the focal point of the fight, you know? Or maybe you don't. Maybe that's why you're watching this. I don't know. So the Revenants really, you know, put so much pressure on the player to keep moving. I mean, everything really does. The pinkies, of course. It's necessary to go into that room to get those cells, in my opinion, but it's also a very dangerous move to make prematurely. You do need to clear out some of the chaff before you do. Zombie man. All right. This is my map, and I'm making it look like I have no idea how to play it. I would say that this fight required just a little more concentration than I was capable of coming up with, while also talking at the same time. I've seen people defeat this fight without breaking much of a sweat. It's not the hardest fight in the world, but I balance the difficulty around Doom that is maybe just a little bit harder than I can play without saving. We come down here, there's another chain gun. The chain gunner's nest that the player saw down early if they came down here. We open this up, it opens this door and this window, and this is just to kind of give the opportunity for monsters to chase the player into this area if they try to run away from that trap. I didn't necessarily have a problem at all with the player opening this and trying to run through here. I don't think it's a good idea. I think that the player will eventually run out of stuff. So finally up here, this is where you get the blue key. And originally I had an arch vial here. It just was kind of lame. So we just give the player a Revenant to just kind of remind them that they need to backtrack now. A lot of players will see this and be like, well, how do I get through here? Unfortunately, you have to backtrack. You have to go back the way that you came. But I do the player a bit of a favor to make it take a little bit less time. So, one thing that I put here is a path to the blue bars. This is a way back, and I made sure that it had a safe floor for the player to be on, just to kind of not discourage them from coming over here and being in this area. I do find that if you put stuff in poison, it can discourage people from going over there. So you gotta do what you can to help the player out. Probably could have done a little bit more to highlight the floor here. Maybe cast some light down onto it or something, but I wanted the room to be pretty dark so it looks like it's a ruined part of a tech base. I think I ultimately accomplished what I wanted to set out with the detailing here. Just to kind of give something that's not totally boring looking. Use the classic textures to the best of my ability, but without making it just look like a 90s WAD. So now that we have the blue key, though, we come down here and open the blue bars. Oh boy, I don't remember this guy here. This is actually back to where we picked up the super shotgun. And I use a conveyor belt, a boom feature, to push the Baron into that trap. So he is there to surprise the player when he comes back. He or she, I should say. Or they, you know. So what you see here is we have an Archvile trap. But there isn't just one Archvile, there's two Archviles. Unfortunately, I just did not achieve what I really wanted to with this fight by having these Archviles here. This was an experiment in trying to use Archviles to kind of resurrect enemies and kind of make things a little bit more, you know, to freshen up an area that the player has already been to. But they just don't behave that predictably when it comes to that kind of thing. They don't run around and resurrect the monsters nearly as much as they just kind of try to immediately go after the player. There's probably quite a few reasons for that. There's not that many monsters actually in here to resurrect. A lot of them will be left in this vicinity because the player encounters them for the first time out here. And then just the way that the area is laid out, for an enemy to get to the player, they have to go up these stairs and go this way, and then finally here. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is with the way that this room is designed, a lot of enemies just come right here and they get stuck and they just stay down there and they become completely neutered. So it's a lesson in kind of understanding how you lay out the room affects how monsters navigate through the room and what kind of threat that they play to the player, or they make to the player. That may seem obvious, of course, you know, like how you make the arena shape is going to dictate how dangerous monsters are, but it's not just where the player can go and what monsters are in the way of the player. It's also how the monsters are able to navigate through the arena. And in Doom, that will play out unpredictably to some degree. Or I should say, unintuitively. I think it is probably pretty predictable for people who have a lot of experience, but it's not necessarily intuitive for people who don't. So now we're back up here. We have some firepower. We could deal with the Revenants if we really wanted to, but I intentionally made sure to kind of emphasize the super shotgun in the player's arsenal over the rocket launcher and the plasma rifle. Now remember, if you hadn't found the first secret, the player would not actually have the rocket launcher at this point. So in all likelihood, what most players are going to do is ignore the Revenants up on the sniper perches, and they will continue to just go for the progression. One thing that you notice that is that I didn't necessarily point out earlier is that the blue locked door is actually in the starting room. And that was just to kind of, I just like it when the player starts out next to a locked door sometimes. Obvious trap is obvious, isn't it? This is not a very difficult trap, but I think it's okay to give the player something a little bit easier to digest after the major trap in the right before the player picks up the blue key where the plasma rifle is located. So this is just to kind of keep things frantic but not necessarily be a grueling experience. And one thing that is also going on is that once this trap is sprung, an Archvile spawns in the starting room and starts resurrecting the monsters around the arena. And the hope was to get the players to kind of come down here and deal with it. I didn't actually even see where he was. Oh, there he is. But in another case of irony, if you don't understand just intuitively how monsters are apt to navigate through an area, what a lot of times happens, the Archvile actually spawns, I think the spawn point is up here. I have to look back at the thing. Is that the Archvile spawns up here, and hopefully he kind of is trying to get to the player up here, and will start resurrecting monsters in the way. But again, there's just not enough concentration of monsters here for him to really resurrect a whole lot of stuff. And sometimes the Archvile will just stay in this area. He'll just kind of keep running through here, or he'll get stuck in here. There's just way too many things that get in the way of the Archvile, and I experimented with placing him in a few different locations. Unfortunately, this type of area is just not very good for an Archvile to freely roam, I don't think. I feel like the Archvile probably makes a little bit more sense here if he's perched up on something and he's not used as a resurrection trap. Or maybe you use a couple of Archviles and just kind of make sure that the way that you place other monsters that are likely to be killed is in such a way that the Archviles are more likely to encounter them. So here's another secret. The player can see it. If you look up in here, you would see the soul sphere. So you come back over here. It's a classic hit the computer monitor, find a little secret teleporter, bada boom, there you go. So this is where the player will find the rocket launcher naturally without finding it in the secret. And there's a few specters that kind of pop up and get you. But nothing too dangerous, just to kind of keep you on your toes. There were some chain gunners in here to just punish players who run freely into this room. And that is also kind of what purpose the mancubuses pose. They're not very hard to deal with if you take out the enemies in a kind of calm and measured way. But if you panic, it's possible for you to just run into a shitstorm of trouble. So hitting this switch will raise up this platform here, which converts into a lift when it gets to the top. And again, that is just to give an opportunity, as I alluded to earlier, this switch here is just to give an opportunity for the player to escape the secret if they discover it later. The reason the player is a lot more likely to discover it is because they will notice this misaligned texture a lot more readily than down there. And in fact, a lot of times players don't even go down here before they come up to this area because of the frantic nature of everything else. So this is one of the major visual set pieces of the map, and this is something I'm actually really proud of. So far we've seen what this map is, this entire self-contained area. And it's, you know, been pretty big, it's been pretty expansive, there's been a lot to explore. But you may be wondering, well, where does the player go next? You might have thought about these, which, by the way, this is OTEX again. This is my attempt at blending stock textures with OTEX, and I think I did pretty good at that. That's an OTEX texture, that's a little misaligned. You may think that, oh, that's going to open up or something like that, and it kind of does, but not quite. So here's what this does and how it looks. It's going to drain the mud out, because I like it being some kind of basin that can drain, and then the gate's lower, and it turns out that there's been something behind this gate the whole time, an entire second area of the map. This is basically like part B of the map. So this is a very intricate trap, and I think it's worth taking a few minutes to explain what this area looks like and what the intention behind it is, and then I'm going to spring the trap and I'm going to show it to you. So let's pause for a quick aside, and when we return, we will be... Okay, let's pause for a second, and when we return, we will spring the trap and I will show you how it actually plays out. This is the area of the map that the final set piece takes place in. You can see that it is basically the same size as the entire preceding map. It is meant to be a shocking reveal, a part 2 that the player wasn't expected. What it ends up being is a perhaps an unfair escalation in difficulty that the player isn't expecting, and it the concept of the fight sort of collapses under the weight of its execution. It does not do what I want it to do. When the player crosses these line defs here, which represent the outer border of this lowering gate that separates the basin from the rest of the canyon, several these containers begin to lower down that have pain elementals inside of them. These begin to lower down as well, which will eventually begin spawning cacodemons on this side and revenants on this side. And then after about 10 seconds, archviles follow as well. Now the idea behind it is that the objective of this part of the fight is to find the red key and the yellow key. And then in any order, one of them is up here, one of them is down here, and to encourage the player to be chased away by the horde of monsters. I'm just imagining this tidal wave of monsters. The player is running out into the canyon to seek shelter from it. They have several different ways they can go through it. They can go up through there. There's a splitting path where they can go up here, jump across. They could go down here and eventually wind their way back up all the same. There's lots of ammo to be found. The player could potentially go up here where they will eventually get a rad suit. They could stay down below and make sure that there isn't anything. This is a very safe area, more or less, in terms of having lots of cover. Eventually they go up here by one of two different ways. Where the red key is, of course, yellow key is up here. Finding either of those two keys The first time will reveal the Cyber Demon, and then pressing both switches will lower this final wall here that the final exit is in, and lower this platform here, so the Cyber Demon can begin roaming on the ground after the player if he has not been killed already. Now, unfortunately, this does not execute the way that it is intended, and the reason is primarily because of the monster composition and a few other things that I actually will discuss during the live footage. So with that being said, let's jump back to it. So, all that being said, let's get to it. So, the platforms lower down. Revenants are going to come down. Most players dealt with them, but not everybody did. A couple of chain gunners spawn up here, yeah. And enemies begin flooding out of the teleporters. Now, in an early iteration of the map, I put a lot of resources near where those monster teleporters are. And it allowed people to just stay up there and fight stuff without having to come up into the canyons. This is supposed to be very, very frantic, of course. And I think it is if you play it the ideal way. I think that these pain elementals, while in theory they're reasonable, they just put way too much pressure on the arena and just make things get out of control to a degree that I don't really like. I mean, on one hand, this is ultra violence, so the argument can be made that that's what you get. But they just make it get so out of hand. So here's one of our Archvile friends. We're going to take him out. If he would stop running around in circles, please. There we go. And we need this ammo up here, because there's Archviles down here that we need to deal with. And they are very hard. This is a very hard fight to deal with if you don't kill the Archviles. In fact, I think that's probably the best strategy, is to get the Archviles dead as soon as possible. Maybe the Pain Elementals first, and then the Archviles. Although Pain Elementals could technically be ignored for a bit, there is a lot of ammo here, and I think running out of it is not much of a concern. Oops. The trick is to try to get the Archviles through. Of course, so many Revenants here. This is a bit bordering on slaughter. I don't personally think it's slaughter, but somebody would probably make the argument that it is. One of the Archviles is dead. I doubt the other one is. There's a secret here, by the way. Oh my god. Huge nuke. And you can see even as how this is playing out, that most of what I'm doing is just concentrated up near the beginning. It's just the best place to try to deal with the enemies. It's hard to deal with them out in the open. I do think that there's a right way to do this. I think that there's a way to set this trap up and make it kind of have more of the desired effect. I think the first thing that I would do is I would remove the Archviles from the fight entirely. And the reason for that is they just put too much of a pressure on the player. They make it a priority to come out of the caves or the canyons rather than stay in the canyons like I wanted to and deal with them immediately. It's not a sound strategic decision to leave the Archviles alive for very long. Here's another secret, by the way. You got to hit a switch here in this teleporter and a switch here in this teleporter. We'll be rewarded with some rockets and a megasphere. And so when the player is more or less coerced into coming back out of here, it's totally counterintuitive to what the intent behind the design was. What I would do is I would make this area maybe just all Revenants, or Revenants and something else. I would make it enemies that move on foot only. I would make sure the pathing allows for enemies to move appropriately. I ran into a lot of trouble with that. This dais changed shape about 7 times because enemies would come up here and just get stuck, and that made it very easy to deal with too. It's just like you would just have like 20 revenants and all the archviles clustered up there, and you could just pop them all with a really easy volley of rockets. I would make sure that the pathfinding works for the enemies, and I would probably spawn enemies throughout this canyon, not just have these guys here. Maybe rely a little bit more on cacodemons or something like that even. Cacos and revenants would have been a good distribution. But unfortunately, yeah, it's basically like I had this design, and then I did everything in my power to make that design the least logical way to do the map. So there's something to be said about sticking to an idea, and if you do want to stick to an idea, to really understand what it is that makes that idea work. Because I had several ideas that conflicted with each other. I thought I really wanted archviles to show up. I thought I really wanted pain elementals to be there, and I didn't toy with the idea of changing what they were basically at all once I came up with the idea for the trap in the first place. So I just kind of... I never really considered taking them away, and that made the fight do exactly the opposite of what I wanted it to. So let's go ahead and do some progression. We spent enough time on this as it is. That fight is more or less done. So you can see we have still basically the entire canyon to explore, and we have dealt with the major set piece of the canyon. Whereas my idea would have been that the player just fights their way through this, and it's a grueling battle through the canyon. But it's not. And I will not continue to belabor that point. So when you pick up the first key, regardless of which one it is, there's 2 keys to get, of course. But when you pick up the first key, it spawns a cyber demon on top of that platform. Nice thing is that he tends to infight with those barons a lot, so they become less of a problem for you. But if you go with that key first, it makes this one way harder to get up this lift. This is the only way to get up here. Actually, that's not true. There's another way to get up here. So this is another major trap here. Hopefully, these pinkies kind of slow you down, you know, because the idea is that if you have the cyber demon here, you have an immediate need to just run in here and get away from the rockets. If you do, and no matter which you go, you can go this way, or you can go this way, it will spawn the archvile and all the pinkies and chain gunners. I think that trap works pretty well. It does about what I wanted it to. Alright, so you come through this little hellish area, and I did make it an effort to kind of contrast the tech base area with this more like ruined natural area and the hell type of stuff. There's a little bit of a... There's not really a story to this map, but there is a concept to it, I suppose, to some degree. Even though I said I wanted it to be more or less abstract, and I think it is, it still had to have some kind of logic behind it. But it's not really worth mentioning too much. It's the logic itself. Just, you know, there's a little hell corruption outside of this little base type of thing. Maybe that's a studying thing, or maybe it's ancient, you know, that kind of thing. So we have the second key now. We have the red and the orange key. The yellow key, I should say. And now we can finally more or less move on to completing the map. So up here we hit both of these. This is a boom trick to make it so that 2 switches are required, of course, to open the final way through. And when you do, it lowers this wall here, which hopefully the player will see from the dais, but if they don't, they'll eventually get out here. But it also lets the cyber demon roam freely. So this is the first fight with a cyber demon in any map I've ever made. And let's see how it is. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to it. There's a little bit more going on to prevent just straight up circle strafing him. But a lot of expert players are probably going to kill those revenants and barons before they really worry about the cyber demon. We're almost done with this map. Here's a classic trick. Tell me if you've seen this one before. Probably makes things a little bit grindy. I don't know if it's entirely necessary. Now those are mostly dealt with. So now we can go through, or go up the lift here. And we are just about done with the map. But before we do, your punishment for trying to escape the cyber demon without fighting him. I hope most people are not that wimpy at this point. Oh my god. This like guy is impossible to hit all of a sudden. Alright. Should be enough to get him. Alright. Cool little detailed little hell chamber. Oh, some textures that should be aligned. My bad. I wanted this kind of expansive void. I don't know why, I just thought it would be kind of neat. Teleport across. This is how you get out of the map. This will take you back to the map if you want to do cleanup. This is how you exit the map. You step into the bitrate crusher and you realize your dreams. So, that was Aspect of Daedalus. How do we do? Let's take a few more minutes to kind of talk about that before we wrap up here. You know, Aspect of Daedalus is an interesting map to me. I don't actually really like playing it all that much in retrospect. I had a lot of fun making it, although there were several parts of the development process that were just grueling and frustrating. I love the way that it looks, although some random YouTube comment on somebody else's video that said it looks like Oblige made my map. Oof, I hope that it doesn't look that bad. I happen to like the way that it looks. And I really appreciate the lessons that it taught me about my own mapping style and the mistakes that I tend to make when I map. I think that you have to be very cognizant of the way that you are constructing your fights and how they actually contribute to what you want your fights to do. Maybe not just your fights, but the way that you intend progression to play out, the way that you lay out areas in general, and the way that you signal things to the player. When you put the player in a high-stakes situation, what you are doing is you are compromising their ability to process new information or potentially relevant information. So you have to be mindful of the player's mental overhead and their ability to deal with what you're throwing at them. If you make things too complicated, then they're not going to be able to figure out what you need them to figure out, especially if the way that your map plays is predicated on very specific things happening. The other thing is that your monster composition matters quite a lot in terms of what is possible to happen in a fight and what will and won't happen. Things like arch files can really change the dynamics in predictable and in unpredictable ways depending on how intuitively you understand how they work. You have to be very mindful of all of this type of stuff. I put a lot of effort into this map, and a lot of the effort that I put into this map went into getting in my own way. I learned quite a bit on how to ruin your own plans, and I hope that at least somebody can take something away from this to help them be a better mapper. Thank you so much for watching. I will return again in the future with another mapping diary.